Hi, my name is Paula, and you're listening to the Let's Talk Change podcast. Hi everyone, welcome to the 7th episode of the Let's Talk Change podcast. This week I talked with Marie Wilson, also known as Mindful Peaks, about sustainable outdoors, gear, transportation, and self-care. Also, I was not at home when recording and my voice quality is not great, so keep that in mind. I'm really sorry about that. Nevertheless, I hope that this episode will be enjoyable, and thank you so much for listening. Hi everyone, it's Paula here, and I'm here with Marie today from Mindful Peaks.
Hello everyone.
So could you tell us something about yourself, maybe how you started your activism journey, how it all began?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the biggest reasons that I got involved in activism, or just looking back on it now, was probably my upbringing. I spent a lot of time being in the outdoors, going hiking, going skiing. That was a huge part of like my childhood and just how my parents raised me. But I just enjoyed those things kind of on their own and never really made the connection to the environment until I was probably about like 19 when I went to college. And it was then that I got way more interested in sustainability, and I went to school in like a very, I guess you could say, progressive city that was very focused on the environment. And that's where I became vegan and just started understanding like all of the effects that our actions have on the planet. And that, like a lot of people, I think went on for a few years. And then I realized that every aspect of our lives was kind of interconnected with the planet. And it was sort of like an aha moment for me that the actions that I took, whether I was on the trail or off the trail, were directly impacting these wild spaces that I loved exploring. And so that's kind of, I guess, a really brief overview of how I got involved in it. And yeah, as someone who cares about the planet, and obviously I love all of the wild spaces and national parks that we have here, but you know, every aspect of our planet is being affected by the climate crisis. And so kind of having my activism centered around both aspects of the planet, protecting these wild spaces, but also, close to home where we're seeing effects right outside of our doorstep.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely also a case in Poland. You can just see how the world is changing. For example, like by the amount of snow that we used to have versus like, nowadays. So the next question that I wanted to ask you is, when did you become so deeply connected to nature, and how did that inspire you to begin your activism?
Yeah. I think kind of like what I said, I think it really goes back to just like growing up that I wasn't maybe aware of it in the moment, how big of a part being outside and being in nature played in my life. So I'd say probably when I was at college or university, when I was like 18 or 19, that I really understood and was like so much more thankful to have these, wild spaces to go out into, whether I was, taking a break from school or going with my family on a trip or just whatever it was. I definitely realized how like precious this land was and how I felt so much more like at peace and calm. I'm definitely someone who prefers that over being like in a big city. And so I think, yeah, I realized that it was just like a very big part of my life, and knew that I felt like I was waiting for other people to like save the planet. And I was like, well, surely there's people's jobs who it is. And obviously there are, but I definitely felt compelled to like take action in any way on my own, whether that was through just individual actions, or I eventually started a blog to like share kind of everything I was learning just for fun, which over time, over the past few years, just turned into me becoming a writer, a freelance writer full time, pertaining to like the outdoor industry and climate change. And so I think it was just kind of an aha moment that a lot of people have, that they're like, oh, surely it's people's jobs to like make sure that this, doesn't happen, or that we put an end to some of these really harmful practices. And realizing that as an individual, obviously I'm not like a politician, or I don't have like a PhD in environmental science, but I think I realized that we can all make a difference, even if we are just one person, which was kind of, I guess, yeah, a big turning point in terms of activism.
Yeah, I agree, and I can definitely relate to what you were saying about like the connection to nature, because I definitely do have that as well. And
Mm-hmm.
what can we do to make our outdoor adventures a little bit more sustainable? What are some of your like top 5 tips that you would give to a person who just new to the topic?
Yeah. Well, I think one big thing that I share a lot about and that I try and get people to understand is that just because something is outdoorsy or has to do with the outdoor industry, we think that it's inherently like sustainable, or that these companies are all, obviously they should be putting the planet first if they're encouraging people to get outside.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that's still not the case. There's all of these same practices that we see in fast fashion, or just immense amount of non-renewable resources being used, or the constant need to be continually buying new gear, which is kind of counterintuitive when it comes to, or like purchasing new clothes, when it comes to protecting the planet. So when I talk about sustainability in the outdoors, it kind of breaks down into like 3 main areas, or I guess we could say 4. So one of the most obvious things that we can do, which I think most people are aware of, is our actions on the trail. So that's, staying on paths, not trampling over like delicate ecosystems, and, not leaving trash in the outdoors,
Yeah.
which sounds like a no-brainer, but unfortunately there are still plenty of people that do that. And I think most people see that and they can comprehend that those actions, obviously, when we do them, can directly benefit those wild spaces. And the other areas surrounding sustainability can be, a lot of it is done kind of off the trail. So again, making that connection that our actions when we're at home or at the store or driving are all connecting to those spaces that we're going to explore. So the first way, or I guess kind of sector of sustainability in the outdoors, is when it comes to kind of the gear and the clothing that we have, which again is very similar to fast fashion and how those practices are really harmful. So doing our best to buy used gear, or repairing and making our gear last, and not thinking of our gear or any of our clothing, whether that's for the outdoors or not, as just disposable, and that we can just like wear it a few times where it gets a rip or a stain and then we just throw it away. Obviously sometimes we can't repair items, but yeah, just making our gear last as long as possible. And if we do buy new, and we are privileged enough to do so, that we are purchasing from brands that are putting the people and planet ahead of profit, which there's not that many brands. I know Patagonia is one of the most well-known outdoor brands, and they are kind of at that forefront, but also, they do encourage their consumers to still try and buy their used gear as well, or repair their gear. You can send it back in. So that's really, having that mindset of making our gear last, not just buying it all the time. It's kind of like one, I guess there's a lot of little tips and nuggets in there, but that's kind of like one way. Another way comes in the form of the food that we're consuming. I am a firm believer that not everyone is going to go vegan and zero waste and all of these things overnight. Obviously, that would be amazing, but I know that there are a lot of barriers for a lot of people. So I think just educating ourselves on how the food we are eating, or how it is packaged even, is affecting these places. So if we do have enough time to prepare and we are going out on like a long hike or trail run or skiing, whatever it might be, that we are taking the time to like prepare food ahead of time that maybe doesn't come in a package, And how are we packaging that food? Do we have reusable containers that we can use? Or are we just using like single use like plastic bags? Excuse me. So yeah, it's just being aware of how like the food we eat, both on and off the trail, how those actions are affecting these spaces. And the last way that is kind of, I guess, involved in the outdoor industry would be our transportation. It's really easy, especially here in the States. We don't have like a very good train system, or like good ways of getting people around in a very efficient way. Some big cities do, but not compared to a lot of other parts of the world. So a lot of people have to drive oftentimes like over an hour to go to these places that they want to go on hiking, which is great that it's accessible, but understanding like, okay, can we maybe carpool with a few people, or can we take a bus if we want to, or if, right now, obviously because of the pandemic, people aren't like probably traveling as much, which is good, or signing up for like ultra marathons or things like that. But really, when we do these big grand things, thinking about trying to like stay close to home. I know I live on like the west coast of the United States, which is much more mountainous than a lot of other parts, and we're really close to a lot of national parks and whatnot. But doing our best, yeah, to stay in the area so that we're just traveling less, we're like emitting less CO2, that we're still able to explore these spaces and get access to them without having like 10 people all drive their own car to this one trailhead if we're all meeting up or something like that. So I guess that's, I don't know if that was 5 or more than 5, but little, tips that I think can really help make the outdoors just more sustainable. And I think the biggest thing is just understanding that all of the actions we take off the trail are directly impacting these wild spaces, and that it's not just, oh, well, I don't litter when I'm out on the trail, so I've done all that I can as a consumer for the outdoors. So yeah, making that connection, I'd say, is kind of the biggest thing we can do.
Yeah, I definitely do agree with what you said. These tips were really helpful. And so just jump to the next question. So where do you buy your outdoor gear, and how do you make it last as long as possible?
Yeah. So I share a lot about that on my Instagram, and I just did one today of like 15 places we can find used outdoor gear, because I do my best to buy used if I can. And there are places, big major companies that we're aware of that most people are, like Patagonia or North Face or REI, which is like a huge outdoor retailer here in the States. They all have like websites integrated into their websites that sell used gear. So if someone returns something and they don't like it and they can't sell it full price, that way you're knowing that you're getting very high quality gear that is intended to last for a long time from those brands, but it is also, lightly used or gently used. Other places like local thrift stores, I know that can be pretty based off of like where one is located. If you're somewhere that's very flat and doesn't have a lot of outdoor activities, probably less gear at like a local thrift store or consignment store compared to living in the mountains of Colorado or something like that. So I'd say, yeah, trying to do that. And also just like online places like eBay or different like thrifting apps. Like, I'm trying to think of them right now. I know there's like Depop and ThreadUp and things like that, you might have to search a little bit more. And I'd say a tip for finding like used outdoor gear is to be patient, like know what you want, and accept that you might not find it the first day that you're looking for it. We've kind of become like accustomed to like instant gratification of finding it. And I mean, keep trying, and when in doubt, if you can't find it and you really want this thing or need it, do your best to, again, purchase from, if I do have to make purchases, I'll probably purchase from like Patagonia. But more often than not, I'm able to find everything I want used, because there's so many people that are buying stuff every single year still, unfortunately, even if they don't need it. But that does mean then that there are used items for other people to purchase. And in terms of making it last, a lot of ways we can make it last. The first is to take care of it, as straightforward as it sounds, as like our little tag says on there. It's very easy to be like, oh, I just want to like wash all these things because they're dirty. But a lot of outdoor gear, if it's waterproof or certain materials it's made of, washing it like in a washing machine is just gonna make it break a lot faster versus like just wiping it down with like a wet rag or something like that, whatever the care instructions are on it. And yeah, doing things like, if they are waterproof, continually like waterproofing them each year with like a spray that one has, or also like the second we see like a small hole or a rip or a tear, doing our best to repair it or sending it back to the company if they have like a good policy on that and they'll repair it. Because oftentimes we can like see a tear or a hole and just kind of like brush it off and not want to, take the 15-20 minutes to repair it. But over time, the bigger it becomes, the harder it is to like make that item last. So catching those things like early on. And yeah, just doing our best to like care for it and be mindful when we're out in the outdoors. Obviously, it's there to protect us, so we should be able to like not wear it like it's super delicate. It's meant to, last. But yeah, whenever we get home, like taking the time to properly dry things out if that's what they need, and just being intentional about it and really thinking like, how can I make this item last for as long as possible? And I mean, the same goes for clothes we wear when we're not in the outdoors too, taking care of them, making them last, and not thinking of them as just like, oh, I'll just like get all new hiking gear next year or 2 years from now because I don't really care about this. But yeah, just being really mindful of how we go about caring for them, I'd say.
Yeah, I do agree. Because I used to ski quite a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really into like climate change and saving the planet back then. So I did get like, new gear, even though I didn't need it. But like, I was still young and I didn't really understand
Mm-hmm.
the problem. And I mean, I wasn't using it almost at all just because of the pandemic and school. And like, for example, my family and a lot of like our friends are just giving the things that are, for example, too small for me because, like I'm a teenager, so I grow
Mm-hmm.
quite fast
Yeah.
right now. So we just like donate the things. Like for example, when somebody's too small for me, then I just give it to my brother, and then they give it to someone younger and younger and younger, and that just goes on until it it can't be used anymore. So I think that's also a good practice.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really easy to like I think most people do that. I mean, I'm the youngest of three kids, so I all of my ski gear growing up was I never had anything new. It was like
Yeah.
passed down from my sister to my brother to me. And I think that's a lot more common when we think about like when we're growing or when we're younger, but then we kind of like lose that mentality when we're older, when we can still pass things on or swap things with friends or people we might know that are like similar sizes. Like if I got a new backpack or something that I found used that I really wanted, I could see if anyone else wanted this old backpack that I had. Like it's, a one size fits all type thing. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, having like clothing swaps or even like gear swaps with friends, or if there's like local shops that do that too. I know like the local ski shop where I live has kind of a program for, yeah, used ski gear that we can just bring it there so that people who are looking to get involved in skiing or outdoor sports can find high quality gear that's affordable. That's not hundreds and hundreds of dollars like some outdoor gear can be.
Yeah, and I think that also a quite popular option in Europe. I don't know about the US, but you can rent like skis. Like there's just a lot of ski renting places, so that's A, cheaper, and B, just better for the planet. So if you don't want to buy your own, you can always like rent it. It's quite popular here. I don't know if that's popular in the US.
Yeah, there are like some I'd say ski shops for sure, but even like the big retailer like REI that's a lot of over across a lot of the US has spots where you can rent almost any type of gear. So like if you need a tent or if you need snowshoes, whatever it is, which one is way more economically friendly for a lot of people, but it's also just going to be better for the environment. If I only go if someone goes camping once a year, it might be better to just rent a tent each year. And one, you could probably use a higher quality tent that you can afford to rent each year, but also then we're not all just purchasing and consuming all this gear that we're not going to use that often. So yeah, I think renting, I can't believe I didn't say that. Yeah, is definitely a really good way to just help the planet and help it make it more accessible to more people.
Yeah, I do agree. And now I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit of a different topic. I wanted to talk about self-care just because like COVID is quite a hard time. So I think that just um, sharing our views can be really beneficial for some people. So how do you practice self-care? And do you have any tips which anyone can find helpful?
Yeah, for sure. One, I think that's, yeah, great. And I think we should always practice self-care, but like you said, especially over this past year, I think it's much even more needed for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest things that I try and tell people to do that I do personally is taking time away from social media each week. Whether that's, some people might just want to do like they don't have any social media in the evenings, which is what I do, or just having like the weekends where I'm just not on my phone. And I think it can get very easily overwhelming, just eco anxiety as well as like general anxiety to constantly be consuming all this stuff and reading all of these stories that are very true and factual, but also can be quite sad at times when we think about the state of the planet. So, yeah, taking time to just like unplug and be present, one, which is an immense privilege in itself, but, protecting our mental health so that we avoid burnout, that we can still remain hopeful and keep doing the work. Because if we're constantly trying to just go, 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 like 24/7, it can we can all get burnt out, I think, very easily. So understanding that, yeah, taking time away from social media is a huge one for me, which I guess goes hand in hand with like I try and make a point of I'm always reading at least like one book that's fiction based because I read a lot of like nonfiction books, whether it's about, climate change or just social injustices, which is good. And I think we need to read those books. But again, they can be pretty like they can make you feel pretty down and like sad. And especially when our mental health is in this state, just having something that maybe is uplifting or we can just kind of like tune out for a little bit is really helpful. And I personally make a point of trying to like meditate each morning and like journaling, as well as like talking to other people, especially because so many of us have been much more isolated this past year than we normally are.
Yeah.
Whether, if we can't be together, if it's FaceTiming a friend or having a Zoom meeting and just talking about the things that are making us feel anxious, really kind of sitting with those feelings is uncomfortable a lot of the time. But I think as I've gotten older, that's one thing I've learned that, if we try and just like push down all of our stress and anxiety, it doesn't disappear when we do that. So, kind of confronting it and journaling is a great way to go about that. Just writing down all of the thoughts in our head and just to kind of like get them out can be really therapeutic for a lot of people. Um, yeah, I'd say those are some of the things that definitely are helpful in terms of mental health for me.
Yeah, these are really great things to do. Yeah, do you have anything to like add or like anything that you would like to talk about?
I think it's important to note when we like talk about climate change and the climate crisis, kind of when we make the separation between individual and like systemic changes. Because when I first got involved in activism and just learning more about this, I felt a lot of pressure, and part of it that was just like pressure I put on myself, and part of it was kind of the movement at the time, was to like be like the quote unquote like perfect environmentalist and
Yeah.
do everything perfectly and be 100% vegan and zero waste and just like all knowing perfect. I don't own a car. I have no carbon emissions, just like absolutely perfect, which is amazing if some people can do it. But I think that can kind of hold a lot of people back from taking action. And the only time, or not the only time, but when I get any like pushback online, it's when I talk about that. But I do think that there is that idea of like the perfect environmentalist can hold a lot of people back because they're afraid, like, oh, I'm not fully vegan, but maybe I'm trying to cut back on meat, or I still buy some things in plastic, but I'm like doing my best, which is amazing and should be celebrated. But unfortunately, it can still be looked down upon in a lot of ways within the environmental movement. So I think understanding that we can take individual actions, but also systemic actions like starting a podcast or voting or contacting officials and companies and protesting and signing petitions, that all of those actions are just as important. And I think having that realization can kind of stop us from putting so much pressure on ourselves for all of these individual actions. So it's finding the balance of like challenging ourselves to take individual actions, but not being so hard on ourselves that every time we have to take a car or fly in a plane that we feel like this like immense guilt, like we're at fault for the whole climate crisis. It's all about doing what we can, but understanding that, like I said, those big systemic changes, government changes, huge businesses changing their practices is also what we need in order to take actual climate action.
I do agree. You've made some really good points. And yeah, thank you so much for deciding to join me on this episode. Yeah, thank you so much. I had a really nice time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I'm glad that we finally got to talk in real life. I know we follow each other online, so I'm glad we got to finally virtually meet in some way.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Everything that we mentioned will be in the description box below, so make sure to check it out if you're interested, and make sure to like or subscribe if you haven't yet. Stay tuned for more, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!